Hey everyone, it's Chris from Line Punch Forge. The hardest part of doing a YouTube video is just starting. So here I am just starting. There's been a lot of people watching me on Instagram doing some of the engraving that I'm doing, and I figured it was a time to do a quick just kind of series of what I do for hand engraving, some of the tools, the techniques, some of the systems. I currently use an air graver, so there's an air compressor hooked to this hose, and all of the things associated with engraving. So I'll caveat this series with, I am not a trained professional in engraving. I am, at this point, completely self-taught. I have never taken a course on engraving. I've absorbed a bunch of information. I've taken that information and found ways and techniques that work for me. So I will recommend that if you watch this video and you decide that you want to try hand engraving, and you decide later on as you've done it that you love it, definitely look into taking some classes. Eventually, I plan on taking some GRS classes. There's some engraving schools down in Texas that are really fantastic. And yeah, so this series is just about what I do to engrave as a non-trained professional. One of the most important things that I found with engraving is the sharpening of your gravers. There's a lot of information out there. Some of it's muddied, some of it's relatively complex for beginners. So the first video in this series is going to be about sharpening gravers, specifically the flat and the V graver. Those are the two most common ones that I use. A lot of the time people buy all the things, they get all the tools, and they end up with something like this, where you have all of your different engraving tips and shapes and sizes and things, and I use like 4 of these. So when it comes to doing that, don't do that. Just get a V and get a flat. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on with this series. So, okay, let's talk about gravers. Since gravers are very small, it's hard to get them on camera really easily, especially without a whole lot of zoom and stuff. We're gonna try that when it comes to sharpening. I've got some cameras that'll kind of help with that. But as we're talking about the gravers, I've made these wood ones to help demonstrate what they look like without having to zoom in on something and like point. It's easier to point to large wooden gravers than it is anything else. So to begin with, let's talk about terminology. This angled face on a graver is called the face, and it points upward away from what you're engraving normally. So if I'm using a flat graver, sometimes I'm using it flat like this. More often though, I'm using it up on edge like this. So still that face is going to be facing away from the bottom part of what the graver, which is referred to as the heel. Or belly of the graver. So the belly is the underside of the graver. The heel is the lower portion of the cutting surface. You can see this angled face here has this little facet on the bottom. That little facet that's painted black is the heel of the graver. What the heel does is allows for a bearing surface and some clearance for you to be able to cut through your material. If you've ever tried using a graver that doesn't have a properly sharpened heel, what you'll normally see is that graver wants to dig into the metal and just keep on going down. It doesn't want to like slide nicely across the metal. So generally, this face is cut to about 45 degrees. There are some exceptions to that, but we're not going to go into those exceptions right now because it's going to be a lot of numbers, a lot of angles, and it just doesn't make sense to cover it at the moment. So this face, normally 45 degrees. This heel, normally 15 degrees. And we'll show you how to sharpen them. With the V graver, this V is, on this one, is a 90-degree graver because each of these angles is cut 45 degrees to create that V. So 45, 45 equals 90. There are other gravers like 105s and 120s and a lot of other custom ones there. There's 75s too, but we're going to be talking primarily about a 90-degree graver, which means that each of these angles is cut to 45 degrees on either side of that face. Same thing, face is cut 45 degrees. Normally when you buy a graver, it's already got this angle cut into it and nothing else done to it. So your job as an engraver is to prep these gravers for cutting. And that's what this video is going to be about. How to prep your flat and your V graver. First, we'll talk about the flat. I like to sharpen my heel first. And so what you're gonna see me do on a sharpening stone is I'll take this graver. Let's see if I can find my flat here, which is this guy. It's just a little bitty fella in a GRS chuck. I've already mounted it up so it goes into my handpiece. And that is my graver. What you're gonna see me do with that graver is I'm gonna lay this graver on a stone. I'm gonna raise it up to about 15 degrees and I'm gonna pull it straight back on that stone. I'm gonna bring it forward, I'm gonna lay it flat, bring it up to 15 degrees and pull it back. And what I'm gonna look for is on the back side of the graver, I've now started to create this heel facet. That heel facet is generally about 1/2 millimeter and you want it parallel so that it's not skewed at one angle or the other. So when you lay it on your stone, you're gonna want it nice and flat, raise it nice and straight so that it's nice and parallel, and then pull it straight back to create that facet. Next, what you're gonna see me do is I'll use a GRS wheel for this, but what you're gonna do if you don't have a GRS wheel is do that same thing with sandpaper progressively, usually about 1,000 up to about 3,000 grit sandpaper. And what I'll do is I'll lay my graver flat, I'll pull it straight back, and as I pull it straight back, you're gonna see me rock it up. What that does is it creates a radius on this portion of the heel so that it's not just an angle with another angle, it's a radius that curves up. And so you'll see, I'll do that a couple times on the stone, but I'll finish it up on a GRS wheel. Wheel I'm talking about is one of these guys that goes onto your flex shaft, and it's just a diamond impregnated plastic or some sort of hard rubber material that leaves this beautiful shiny surface. I use these because it's nice and quick. You might not want to buy one of these right away because I think they're close to $90. They do last a very long time, but not necessary. I'll talk about how to do that with sandpaper. For the V graver, I'm gonna do the same thing as I did with my flat, only I want to put heels on either side of this V. And those heels on the either side of the V are going to be, same thing, 15 degrees. Hang on. Sneeze. 15 degrees. What I'm going to do here is lay my graver on its side, raise it up to 15 degrees, pull it back, and create a facet where that little black is. I'll do the same thing on the other side until both sides of that graver have facets on either side of them that are about 1/2 millimeter. This, I can start to radius that as well. I typically don't on my Vs. I haven't done a whole lot of testing on whether or not I like it better or not. But the next thing I'm gonna do after that is polish that little facet that I put in there so it's nice and shiny. The last thing that I'm going to do with both of these gravers is polish the face. Anything that shows up on the graver surface as grind marks, chips, anything like that is going to be imparted upon the metal that you're trying to engrave. So ideally you want this portion of the graver, the face and the heels, to be completely polished. That GRS wheel is typically what I use, but you can do the same thing with sandpaper and or a piece of leather with some rouge. So just create a nice polished metal surface that allows you to just kind of glide right through the metal. So let's go ahead and just show you how I do that. Okay, so one of my favorite sharpening implements for gravers are these Sharpall 3 different grit diamond plates. I got them off Amazon. I'll leave an affiliate link down below. And so I use these. Occasionally I will use a ruby sharpening stone to help kind of polish. I think I got this from Stellar, but this one isn't completely necessary. You can do the same thing with sandpaper. Then occasionally I will use an Allen wrench. The reason behind that I'll make clear in a few minutes when it comes to sharpening the heel. That, I believe, is about it. So I'm going to grab some sandpaper so I can show you that technique as well. But basically sandpaper and some diamond sharpening stones. That'll get us started on engraving. Okay, here we are with our flat graver. There's the bottom part of it. I'm going to paint it in Sharpie so that we can kind of see that facet happening. I'll grab my fine stone because I don't want to take a whole lot off of the graver. I just want to take that little 0.5 millimeter off the tip. So here we are with our diamond stone. Just to verify this is the fine one. Nope, that's the coarse. Extra fine, there we go. So here's our fine one, and here's our graver. So what I want to do is on the back side of this graver, I want to create a little facet right on that tip there. That facet is going to be the beginning of our heel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise this up and make sure we're nice and flat. I'll raise this up to about 15 degrees. And a good way to check that is to take about a 1/8 inch diameter Allen key and rest it right on it. This is about 15 degrees. It can be a little bit less, it can be a little bit more. That's okay. So if you want to do that, you can use a little Allen key to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to raise it up. I'm going to pull it back. Bang, nice and flat. Raise it up, pull it back. Now I'm going to look at it to see I have a little bit on the bottom side of that. It's not quite parallel, and it's a little bit less than 0.5 millimeter. So same thing here. I'm giving a little bit too much on this far side, so I'm going to tip it a little bit towards me and do the same thing. Bring it up, pull it back, and trying to even out that facet. And now I've evened that out. So see how it's nice and even. I have kind of an angle placed on there. You can see that angle as opposed to the bottom belly part of the graver. I'm going to look at it. It looks to be about 0.5 millimeter. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'll take this guy away. And if I didn't have the GRS wheel, I would take some sandpaper. I'd lay it, try and get you in focus here. I'd lay it flat, pull it back, and raise it up to 15 degrees. So pull it back and rotate it up to 15 degrees. Pull it back, and as I do, I'm raising it. And I should have a nice little radius showing up. And so that differentiation between that little facet and the belly of the graver should be about gone. Okay, now for this graver, what you're looking at is the face. So that angle there, you can see that that face has some grind marks on it. Those grind marks are going to transfer into the metal that you're cutting. And let me grab a pointer because my fat fingers can't point to this. This little guy's here. Looks kind of dirty, got some lines going across in there. What we're going to want to do is clean those up. And we're going to clean those up, in this case, with some sandpaper. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue on with the sandpaper. You notice at the bottom part here, I have a nice flat surface for the sandpaper to rest on. That's going to make it so that my surface on my graver is nice and flat. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lift this up to about 15 degrees. I'm turning on a little bit more light. So I'm going to raise this up until it's nice and flat, and I'm going to pull it back. Bring here, raise it up until it's nice and flat, pull it back. I think I'm using 1200 grit sandpaper right now. Pull it back. Now we'll look at that face. We're starting to get rid of some of those lines and start to make it look nice and polished. Same thing. Nice and close here. Make sure I'm nice and flat. Pull it back. Nice and flat. Pull it back. So I'm trying to match that 45-degree angle that's on the bottom of the graver. And you can see now that the bottom part of the graver has a lot of those grind marks gone. So I'm going to switch to a 2000 grit. And now you can see we're a little bit more polished there. You can see that, let me grab pointer again. You can see that up here you have some grind marks still. I'm not going to worry too much about this because the graver's never going to be cutting up here. What I am concerned about is this area right down here where my cutting is going to occur. And so, yeah, that looks good. And this looks good. I could clean this more up on paper, but I'm going to show how the GRS wheel actually works here in a few minutes and show you what that polish looks like using that GRS wheel. So that is basically the flat graver minus the final polishing on the wheel. Okay, here's our 90-degree V graver. You can see on the bottom of the graver, I painted it with some Sharpie. So where that Sharpie is where I'm going to form the heel. You can see that angle face there, that's the face. The underside of the graver that's not getting sharpened is the belly, and we're going to cut in the heel. So to do that, I'm going to lay the cutting face of the graver on its side. I'm going to raise it to about 15 degrees, so that looks something like this. Make sure it's hard to do this on camera, but we'll try and make it so you can see it. So it's going to look like this, and I'm going to pull it straight back to create that same type of facet. So let's see if I can do it at this angle. Raise it up, that looks about good. Nice and flat. Pull it back. And pull it back. And pull it back. Angle, pull it back. And we're going to look at it. And I have a tiny little facet showing up there. Let's see if I can get it to show up here. There it is. So that's on the heel side. That actually looks a little small. Not quite as big as I want, but I'll keep on going. The more you do this, the faster you get at it. And now that looks a little bit more good. So we'll do the same thing on the opposite side. I have to switch hands here. I'm going to raise it 15 degrees or about. It can be 12, it can be 16, it can be 18. 15 degrees is just the general consensus for it. Now, here's the underside here. I want to make sure that they're even. You can see this side is a little bigger. Try and get a better view here. Zoom in. So there's one side, there's the other side. Try and get you guys focused on here. So there's, see that facet there and the facet there. This side, looking on camera, they look pretty even. I'd like to get a little bit deeper, that's a little bit less than 1/2 millimeter. That heel is also going to be a little bit of a relief angle for me to be able to turn around corners. And we'll talk about that when we get to that video. So there we go. Switch hands, do the other side. I'm looking at it off camera here to make sure I like it. Okay. I do like the way that looks. I like the way that looks. They look pretty parallel. There we go. There's one. And there's the other. So next thing I want to do is take all those grind lines off the face, or at least this part of the graver. Let me grab a Sharpie. That bottom part of the graver there that I just highlighted with Sharpie, I want to try and get that nice and polished. And I'm going to do that with the sandpaper first. Start around, oh, let's do this around 1500. So I'm going to raise it up until I'm nice and flat. And you can kind of feel where that graver wants to sit, where it's not rocking up on one angle or the other. I'm going to pull it back. The idea is to start polishing that face. Just like that. So the more polished you can get that on your heel, and on your face, the easier that graver is going to be for you to cut through the metal. So let's stop with the sandpaper, because you can go through that process and make it nice and bright. I'll show you how fast the GRS wheel is. Okay, so this little wheel here is going to be what I'm going to use to sharpen the face. So I'm going to tip up the graver until it's at the angle I want, 45 degrees. I'm going to run the wheel, move it back and forth, and then I'm going to look at it and make sure I'm good. See, now I have that little shiny facet there, see that light sheening off of it? That polished my graver nice and brightly. Now I'll do the same thing with the heel. I'm going to raise it to 15 degrees and I'm going to run my wheel. Check my facets. They're nice and bright. One more time. And I'll do the other side. And a little bit more on the tip. And so now this graver, you can see that light sheening off of that tip. That one is probably nice and sharp. I'm going to test it on my nail. It does dig in. We'll do a test cut on it here in a minute. But before I do that, I'm going to grab my flat graver, and we're going to do the same thing with the flat graver. So flat graver, I'm going to go nice and flat, and then I'm going to rotate up to create that surface. Now I have a nice shiny surface there, and I'm going to want to try and do the same thing with the face. Face not quite even yet. Now you see that bright surface. Test on the corner of my nail. It does dig in. The other side does dig in. I don't like how this one side's not quite parallel. Digs in, digs in. All right, so now what we're going to do is set up the vise and do some test cuts. Okay, what I'm going to do now is do a test for each of the gravers, starting with the flat. I'm going to put it in my handpiece. Typically I use an air graver, but I'm going to test these using hand push. So what I'm going to do is just I'm going to brace my fingers. I'm going to put, this hand is actually below the work on the vise, and what I'm going to do by bracing my fingers is using my palm and my upper body to push the graver and just make a straight line. I'm going to use the corner and push. A little piece coming up there, pick it out, and then I have my little piece there. So this one's cutting nice on this side. I'll do one more, just a nice straight line. Do one on the opposite side, maybe two on the opposite side. So what I'm doing is I'm rotating the graver to the opposite cutting corner. I'm never really pushing flat on the bottom. I'm using one corner or the other. There we go. So I verified now that this graver does cut, and we'll switch over to the V. So the V is basically going to make lines as well. It's going to be a different geometry versus me making one-sided kind of triangle type line and making a V-shaped line. And so the same thing, I'm going to brace my fingers, and I'm going to use my hand and my vise to kind of push through the work. Let's see what this looks like. I want to see the graver in the microscope to see if I like it. I do. So now we'll do the same thing. Okay, this seems to cut okay. I'm going to cut a little curve real fast. I'm using the vise to cut that curve. I'm not really moving my hand at all. That way if I slip, I'm not slipping into my hand. I'm slipping past my hand because my hand is below the vise level. See those curved lines there? Picking my burrs out because they are sharp. There we go. All right, so both these gravers do grave. they do cut. Come back in. Just pick out the burr on the other side. Let's try cutting curves with that other one just because we did with this one. Nice thing with the flat is I can cut lines that kind of rotate one way or the other. But we're gonna go over the graving side of it in a different video. Right now, this important part is verifying the graver's work and how to sharpen them. Pull that burr out. I don't need to cut deep. First cut, I can always go back and cut deeper. Try the opposite side now. Okay. Both sides of the graver are cut well. And next video, we'll go into some more engraving type stuff. We'll probably be using more of the pneumatic handpiece though. I like this, it's nice and quick. Let me kind of show you how that works. We'll put this graver on my handpiece. Since this is a Lindsay, it takes a different size collet, so I have this adapter that goes onto the graver, and then it fits right into my handpiece. I'll turn the air compressor on. You might be able to hear it, and then we'll just do a real quick cut sequence using the flat graver. Because what is a engraving video if we don't actually do a little bit of engraving? So you'll hear the air flow. It's basically what you're hearing. Let me get my foot pedal so that I can control it. Okay. And we'll just cut a real quick curve. See, I need to reposition my hand, so I stopped the graver. I kept the graver in the right position. My hand is not moving at all. I'm going to restart it up now that I've repositioned my hand and moved the vise through. Reposition, stop. Reposition, stop. Same thing. Take my burr out. So now I have a little scroll. Let me zoom in a little. Okay. Now I'm just gonna cut the rest of the scroll, and then we'll call these gravers working. I'm just gonna use the flat for this this demonstration. I'm not gonna use the other one, but we'll get to that one soon enough. Had the graver rotated on this side here, I'm gonna rotate my hand and cut with the opposite side now in that same cut. And then I'm just gonna cap it off. Do another one. I'm gonna rotate the graver away from me. Cut that line. Pick burr out, rotate the graver towards me. Put that tip into the cap. Same thing. We do want to clean that up a little bit. Okay, looks like it works. And that's how you sharpen your gravers. Okay, so that's, I know there's probably a lot of information there. Always feel free to reach out. There's not just one way to sharpen a graver. People have been doing it for long periods of time. They've been doing it with less advanced tools than I have. And so everyone's gonna have their own tips and tricks on exactly how to sharpen a graver. This is how I do it. As you can see, the gravers are sharp, they work, they do what I want them to do. I'm sure there's more refining that I can do on them. There's a lot of different other graver profiles that maybe in some other videos we'll touch on. But for the most part, my work is done with a V graver and a flat graver. So there are, like I said, all sorts of other different types of shapes, and each one has their kind of little intricacies for sharpening. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's the first of hopefully many on engraving, and at least I hope you get out of it maybe a little demystification on how to sharpen your gravers. Also, understanding that when your graver is digging down into your metal and not actually making lines, that's when you need to potentially look at sharpening your heel. Gravers are consumables, so as you're using them, they could chip, they could break, they could get dull, and so stopping what you're doing and resharpening, regrinding your graver is going to be really important to having a long, comfortable work life. You find yourself really fatiguing and pushing and just not getting what you want, it's time to stop. Sharpen your gravers. It's at that point in time, it could be a safety thing. If you're pushing too hard, then you could push it into your hand, and then you've got stitches and medical bills and all that kind of stuff, and nobody wants that. So hopefully this helps. Like I said, if you have questions, please reach out, and I hope you're enjoying the reboot of the YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.